The Unofficial History of Sacha Timony. Part 5. The World Above. Sacha sat for a moment and enjoyed the free air. She had been awake for barely 3 hours at this point, and already so much had happened. Her stomach lurched as she felt a pang of hunger. Slipping off her pack, she opened it up and checked over her supplies. She thanked the gods the ink had not spilled out during her encounters. The paper was still crisp and dry. She found her rations of food as well and began a hasty breakfast as the sun continued to climb the sky. Her strength restored as she ate the salted meat, though it occurred to her that she had little else, and come what may, she would need to find food and water before nightfall. Some way off, she heard a deep-toned bell. She could still see the dock from here. It looked as though the loading had resumed. She would have to get to the ship as quickly as possible if she was going to make the trip. She retied her pack and threw it over her shoulder. Checking her needle, she secured the cord holding it in its baldric. Gritting her teeth, she stood up. It was time to climb. She had kept a length of string out of her bag. Standing at the top of the low thatched roof of the storehouse, she looked up at the tiled roof of the terrace, still 2 stories up from her. The brickwork was smooth, but years of weathering and repair has left some useful cracks and crags for her. She slipped the string into a loop and swung it over her head. It arced through the air and fell back down with a soft thump. She growled and drew it back in. 2 more times she tried, and the string came back down. She sighed and looked at it. "Listen, string, if you behave, I promise I will oil you properly once we are on that boat. But right now, I need you to actually do your job." She lifted it up again, closing her eyes and swinging it over her head. She threw it up and waited again for the sound as it fell, but it never came. She opened her eyes. The string was caught over a patch of jutting brick high above her. She grinned and slowly pulled it tight. Gingerly, she placed 1 foot on the wall in front of her. The string tightened as it took her weight. Placing her other foot against the wall, she began to walk up the side of the building. As she approached the latch hold of the string, she found a footing and stood upright again against the sheer face. It was harder this time, but again she threw the string above her, catching it on snags and walking her way up the side of the building. It seemed to take a lifetime as she climbed, latch hold to latch hold, walking and standing. Far below her, the busy town was bustling, blissfully unaware of the inch-high rogues scaling their walls. Through her exhaustion, Sacha smiled. Finally, she realized there was little wall left. Lassoing the string one last time up, she caught onto a gutter that ran along the edge of the tiled roof. Walking up and climbing over and in, she landed hard in a pile of damp dirt. It squelched under her foot as she stood up again and looked over the side of the guttering at the town below. Her head spun as she realized just how high up she was. She turned on the spot and slumped back down into the dirt. Cursing the lack of cleaners and trying to push off as much of the dirt as she could from her clothes, she stood back up and looked towards the rooftop. Clambering up onto the tiles, she saw a whole new road ahead of her. She ran. This felt exhilarating. A wide field of sloping tiles stretched out before her. High above, the sun shone down from a clear blue sky. She laughed, unafraid for a time of being heard or seen. She felt miles away from any of the big people and their prying. Sprinting and leaping, she made her way slowly but surely across the town. The terrace block led a long way down the street. From there, other houses seemed to always jut out and fill any gap she might have encountered. Arcing around a long mews of rooftops, she came ever closer to the docks. The ship was still loading. She had hours still. Her heart raced with excitement. She was nearly there. She stopped. Her blood ran cold as she heard a sound other than her own footsteps. She dared not look up for fear of what she would see. A cawing cut through the clear air, a swooshing of wings. She looked furtively about the rooftop. Not far from her, there was the opening of a chimney. Smoke billowed out with the scent of roasting meat far below. The cap of the chimney was low. It might just do. She sprang from her spot and leapt at the opening. She crouched under the hood of the chimney, keeping her head as low as possible to avoid the smoke and trying to stay as far from the center as she could for fear of falling down onto the fires below. Ahead of her, on the tiles, she saw clawed talons land. Black feathers ruffled as the bird bobbed its head and looked around. Small, dark eyes spotted her. It cawed again and flapped its wings at her. What was she going to do? She could try and fight it. It was enormous, though, easily 10 times her height. One wrong move and she would be gone for good. She could try and outrun it. Maybe, if it didn't take off, she could keep ahead of it on the tiles at least long enough to get to better cover. Or, she gulped, she could always try climbing down the chimney. It would be a risky descent, but at least the only thing down there to worry about was the fire. She looked back at the bird. It was walking towards her, staring at her. She would have to decide quickly.
This story is written by Jimmy Clephane. For this and more, as well to vote on where Sacha should go next, consider backing Jimmy Clephane on Patreon for as little as £1 a month.